Alley's virtual speaker series. Sorry for that. I'm Dan Dunn, the director of the museum. The virtual program is back, tanned and rested after taking an August vacation. The last time we met, Don Medvedev took us on a geological tour of Mount Diablo and helped to clarify some of the confusing geology of our local mountain. Today, we stay on Mount Diablo. The beacon atop Mount Diablo began life in 1928 as part of a series of beacons in California to aid in the burgeoning aviation industry's navigation. Fearing an attack after Pearl Harbor, it was turned off and stayed dark. We will learn of its past, the beacon's restoration, and its current use as a symbol of remembrance. John Gallagher, one of the Beacon Boys, is our tour guide today. As the restoration crew and caretakers of the beacon are known as the Beacon Boys, John will be our guide. He is a Berkeley native and retired veterinarian. He first visited Mount Diablo as a Boy Scout and developed an appreciation of the mountain as an avid cyclist. He has a lifelong interest in conservation and the outdoors. He's a member of the board of directors of Save Mount Diablo and has been a Beacon Boy since 2012. He and his wife Tina have lived in Danville for 40 years and, like me, are fortunate to have a view of Mount Diablo from their front porch. Please use the chat window at the bottom of the screen for any questions that you have. Feel free to send in questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll address them at the end. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome in John Gallagher. John?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us and supporting the Museum of the San Juan Valley. So yeah, today is all about the beacon. As Dan just said, I've been sort of part of this beacon project for a number of years now. There are a few people around that predate my tenure in taking care of the beacon, but somehow or other, I ended up being sort of the media representative when we undertook the restoration project. So I had to learn quite a bit about the history of the beacon, how it came to be. It is kind of an interesting story. So it turns out that we need to take ourselves back to the 1920s, 100 years ago. Aviation was new. Its future was still opening at that point. And we knew that just like the railroad of the 19th century, that the chance to further commerce, and I'm not talking military at this point, to further commerce with aerial navigation would be valuable. Now, in the 1920s, we did not have radar. So planes could only fly in the daytime, but they wanted to be able to have this new thing called airmail. And so planes would have to stop at night and then pick up the route the next morning. So they thought that maybe they could establish a series of beacons, lights, every 10 or 15 miles along the route, any route all over the country. So here we are. That the truck there says U.S. mail on it. You can imagine the days of giant engines in old biplanes, and so with external cockpits in the cold and so forth, flying only in the daytime. So with this idea of having these beacons lighted at night, the pilots could look for the next beacon. Maybe every 10 or 15 miles, there'd be another light. And in fact, they had these lights all over the country. This map is dated 1924, and you can see the route quite closely following what we know today as Interstate 80. So pilots could leave San Francisco and at night find their way from light to light to light clear across the country. There is a southern route, similarly from Los Angeles to points east. There were north south routes up and down California, roughly following Highway 99 back in the day. So this is you can imagine this is a big deal back then as navigation is still quite in its infancy. Um, the there were beacons in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the desert in Nevada, Utah, southern Utah, and they were all of somewhat similar construction, but varied from point to point. They varied in size, they varied in shape, they varied in brightness, and so on. Most of the beacons were mounted on towers like this. Um, but if you look on the left side there are many different suggestions for how high the tower should be. The little building on the bottom of the illustration is where the generator would be. As of course, they wouldn't necessarily have electricity out in these very rural areas. Significantly, the tower that you see on the left is on a concrete pad, and then there is an arrow, a concrete arrow that pointed the direction to the next beacon. So you can imagine a pilot leaning out of the cockpit of his airplane, finding the tower either in the daytime or at night. They even had lights shining on the arrow at night, so he could find his way to the next beacon. The photo on the right is kind of fun. There is, in fact, a museum in New Mexico, right along the interstate, that you can visit that celebrates this system of beacons all across the country. And this is one of their towers that is there today. You can see the little house shed that held the power plant. And on the roof, it says LA-A, and that would be Los Angeles to Amarillo. So let's get a little closer to home. That, of course, is Mount Shasta in the background. And the photo is a gas station right on Highway 99, immediately south of Mount Shasta City. You can see the Richfield, that would be the Richfield Oil Company, would have paid for that tower and beacon. Of course, you can be a little bit cynical and say, well, the oil company is going to sell more aviation gas, and of course they would. But the tower is still there today, as you can see. The gas station is today vacant, and up at the top of the tower, instead of a beacon, there's an osprey nest. Kind of fun to go see. So let's get a little bit closer to home. Look at this one. 2 arrows. This is a Google Earth image. And we look at those 2 arrows. It's quite unusual because almost all of these concrete pads had 1 arrow to point to the next beacon. This pointed to 2. Anybody know where that one is? Maybe this helps. The mountain in the background is, of course, Mount Diablo, and over on the left, you see downtown Walnut Creek. This is on Acalanes Ridge open space. You can walk to this pad. You can see the 2 arrows there in the foreground. Why the 2 arrows? Well, one pointed immediately north so that they could fly up toward Portland and Seattle. And the other one pointed sort of to the northeast towards Sacramento. And again, the pilot would be leaning out his plane and saying, oh, I guess I'll go that direction. In the hills north of Highway 4, there was another beacon. The brand new 1927 Carquinez Bridge had a beacon on top, and so on, all over the country. So let's get a little bit more local. Our beacon, the beacon on Mount Diablo, is a little different from many of the other ones. It was still on a steel tower and so on, but it's much larger and brighter than most of the other beacons. It was one of 5 financed by Standard Oil of California. The others were Portland, well, Seattle, Portland, and then Monte Diablo, Los Angeles, and San Diego. All of those beacons, to our knowledge, are long gone. Only the one on Monte Diablo exists today. Seeing as it was done by Standard Oil, of course, they put it in their bulletin. Here it is, dated 1928. The airplane that's there flying toward the very stylized image of Monte Diablo, that's for sure. The airplane is kind of fun. It's a Ford trimotor. Ford made just a few hundred of these airplanes. Yes, 3 motors, one on each wing, and then one on the fuselage. And it was a plane that was touted by many to be the first passenger plane to commercially fly. Charles Lindbergh was nuts about that kind of plane. He was touting transcontinental air transport as an airline that would eventually become TWA. And in fact, it was Lindy who lighted our beacon for the first time in April of 1928. He was in Denver and threw a switch that turned on the one here on Monte Diablo and the one on Merced Peak in Los Angeles. You can imagine, again, April 1928, Lindbergh had flown across the Atlantic only 11 months earlier, May of 1927, and you can imagine the fanfare. He was an international hero at that point. He could do no wrong. Anything he said made it into the newspapers, and he was the one that lit our beacon. It was originally, like the others, it was originally erected on a steel tower right at the west end of the upper parking lot at the summit of Monte Diablo. The platform at the top is at about 70 feet, so the light itself was 75 feet above the parking lot. To give you a feel for the scale, the SD, Standard Diablo, the S is about 12 feet tall, the D is 8 feet tall. At the bottom of the picture, you can see the sign there talking about how it was lighted by Colonel Charles Lindbergh. Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover had come out to San Francisco when it was being lighted. Officials from aviation companies and obviously Standard Oil were present when this beacon was turned on. And it stayed there on this tower from 1928 until 1939. Now remember, this is the middle of the Depression, and the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, was working very hard on Monte Diablo. They built so many of the stoves and culverts and stone walls. And they also built the summit building, quarried from local stone. I have no proof of this, but the skeleton of the summit building was the tower, meaning they took the beacon down in 1939, disassembled the tower, and used that steel to build the summit building. I kind of like this. I particularly appreciate the OSHA-approved scaffold that they have, and you can see the beacon right at the top with a man working with it. And over on the right side of the image is the railing for the catwalk up where the man is working. It's just being lifted into place. So this would be 1941, spring of 1941. And then the beacon was turned back on again, shining from the actual observation, well, from this turret immediately above the summit of the mountain. And then, of course, this happened. Everybody has seen an image like this of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Yes, this is the Arizona. In that one ship, 1,177 men lost their lives. And amid the shock and paranoia of that attack, we have in writing here. Let's just look at this for a second. November 25th, trip to Beacon, trip to Beacon, trip to Beacon. 12/8, trip to shut off Beacon as to blackout, and that is the West Coast blackout. People were required to put up curtains, turn off lights that faced toward the Pacific, and of course, the beacon had to be turned off as well. We wouldn't want that thing to be shining out in case of an attack on the Bay Area. So it was turned off. By the end of World War II, radar was sophisticated enough that the whole system of beacons had become pretty much obsolete. Planes could now fly at night using radar. Of course, radar was developed very quickly by the military, and it was functioning in airplanes by the end of World War II. So the whole system of beacons up and down the coast, up and down other points across the United States, and of course, like the one we saw roughly paralleling Interstate 80, all of those became obsolete. And the other beacons had been taken down. We only know about one of them. The one in Portland had been taken down. It was immediately west of downtown Portland. It had been taken down and moved to a warehouse and was probably, like the other ones, probably scrapped during the war effort. We just don't know. But this one was in a new state park, of course. The state park really became a park in 1931. And in fact, there's a little sidebar. In 1928, when the beacon was built, Standard Oil had to ask permission of the owner of the property. It was in private hands in 1928 to build that beacon in the first place. So in 1964, Pearl Harbor survivors and sons and daughters of Pearl Harbor survivors of Alameda County had the idea that they should relight the beacon on Pearl Harbor Day. And Admiral Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, had retired to Berkeley. And so they contacted Admiral Nimitz, and he came out to Mount Diablo December 7th, 1964, and turned on the beacon. It was he, legend has it, it was he who thought that, gee, this is a really nice thing to do. Let's do this every year. And so the Pearl Harbor survivors and sons and daughters of Pearl Harbor survivors continued to sponsor this event up at the summit inside this same building. And they and they did that until the state park found out that they really didn't have appropriate insurance to be hauling up a bunch of these old men and women to the summit to at night to turn on the beacon. So so the state, in their wisdom, wanted to just cancel the event. And you can imagine that did not go over well with anybody. But it was correct. The Pearl Harbor associations did not have appropriate insurance. But Save Mount Diablo saw that this was happening. And well, Save Mount Diablo does have insurance and appropriate paperwork and so forth to hold an event of this kind. And at the time, our executive director, Ron Brown, had done 2 terms in the Navy, so he was a veteran and appreciated the beacon, and stepped up and said, "We'll take it over." So we did. And Save Mount Diablo has been doing this ever since. So here's one of the events. I don't actually know what year this is, but there are some of our survivors, obviously, and over on the left is Ron Brown, our executive director at the time. And then December 2009, a snowstorm hit. The road was closed. So we held the event down at the base of the mountain on Northgate Road, just inside the kiosk. And that was um, interestingly, you could not see the summit from where we held the event. Um, Volunteers Dick Heron and retired Ranger Bert Bogardus walked to the summit to turn on the beacon that night in the snow. You can see on the left of this photo is Bert up there. And it turned out the light lit up just fine, but all of the bearings and so forth were so cold that it would not rotate. Bert and Dick spent some 45 minutes up there in the snow pushing the beacon by hand until it finally started to rotate on its own. And it was at that point that Ron said, maybe we should restore this. Do you think Save Mount Diablo could do that? And Ron contacted Dick, and I happened to be in, and to ask about it, and just to talk about the feasibility of the whole idea. I happened to be in the office at that time, just coincidentally, and saw Dick, and had that. What are you doing here? And he told me, and I immediately said, I want to be part of that project. And so the two of us started to look into it. It was we thought at first we just need a crane, and I have a pickup truck, so we could probably just lower this thing into my truck and take it down to my garage, until we started to realize the size of the thing. And we started talking to the state park people, both on Monte Diablo and in Sacramento, and they put up roadblock after roadblock. You're the wrong kind of group. It has to go out to bid. It's a public works project. You're not competent to do that. We don't have an avenue for a nonprofit to be doing this kind of work, blah, blah, blah. And frankly, they're a real pain. And Joan Buchanan, our assembly member at the time, went to bat for us and introduced legislation in the assembly to allow Save Mount Diablo, a nonprofit organization, to restore the beacon. And of course, it passed the assembly, it passed the Senate. The legislation was signed by Jerry Brown, and all of a sudden, the state became our friend. They had heard from above that they need to work with these guys, and they became wonderful compatriots in this whole effort. They were just great to work with. The historians were helpful. The staff on Monte Diablo were accommodating. They were just great. By coincidence, the agreement was signed on December 7th, as you can see, 2012. On the left is the director of the entire State Department of Parks and Recreation, Anthony Jackson at the time. There's Joan, Ron Brown, Park Superintendent Roland Gabert, and District Superintendent Anita Rodriguez. They were just terrific. And at that point, finally, work could begin. So we had to start checking on hazmat stuff and so forth. Of course, there was asbestos. You can imagine all of the paint on the beacon was lead-based paint. So even before we could take it down, we had to send up the men in their Tyvek suits to scrape away the paint and the sealants and so forth that had been used over the years to stop leaking. And there were lots of leaks. And finally, in June of 2013, big crane drove up to the summit, lifted up the beacon, and we set it down. Shout out about this. This was done by Shell Oil. Shell provided of course, with the refinery in Martinez, they of course had a relationship with a crane company. They used Maxim Crane at the time, and they provided the crane and the riggers, all of the staff necessary to lift the beacon down. We set it on a trailer, and down it would go. Uh, this is not about me, although it is me. The media were there, everybody. This is KCBS. That's Dave Padilla. It's worth mentioning him. Of all the interviews that I did for this thing, he asked by far the best questions. He was a real pro. It was a pleasure to talk with him. But TV stations were there, newspapers were there. Obviously, the radio was there, um, and got to mention Dick. Dick Heron is a retired engineer. I want to say he's my partner on this, but he was way more than a partner. He is the one that actually did the coordination of the project management. He's the one that really had to do the literal or the figurative heavy lifting. So down the beacon went. It was always a joke to an undisclosed location in Concord. Well, somebody had provided warehouse space. This man had a personal connection to the beacon, and he had a secure warehouse in Concord, and above all, he had a forklift. And at that point, we could finally start studying the beacon. So, just to give you a feel for it, the whole thing from the base to the top is about 8 feet. The diameter of the light itself is about 3 feet, just over 3 feet. It's like a flash. You know, many people ask if it had a Fresnel lens, like lighthouses do, but no, it does not have a Fresnel lens. It's a reflector in the back, a glass mirror reflector with a single light bulb. And we started studying. On the left there is another beacon boy, John Stewart, another engineer. He's holding in his hand a light meter. And the beacon is just shining on the wall there. That's the beam, just like any projector. And on the right is Alan Frank. This is the kind of talent we had. He has a PhD in optical physics and an appreciation for history as well. He was just very helpful to work with. And this is what it looks like straight on. Now, I have to point out that is not the full brightness of the bulb. It's turned down to less than 10 volts. Otherwise, you'd never, ever be able to look at it. So the bulbs, just for some of the technical stuff, when the beacon was originally built, it was meant to have, of all things, 32 volts of power. Why 32 volts? I have no clue. In the 80s, Burt Bogardus changed it over to 120 volts so we could use a conventional bulb. So the 32 volt bulb there is on the left, and on the right is the 120 volt bulb. The photo on the right shows what they called a robot. It's an automatic lamp changer. So if in the middle of the night a bulb were to blow out, a switch would trip and a new bulb would rotate into its place automatically and send a telephone signal down to the switchboard in the community of Diablo so that they could notify the electrician to come up and fit a new bulb. That was high tech. But we had gotten word that this older style incandescent bulbs that they used in projectors, movie projectors and so forth, was going to become obsolete. So we worked up a whole new design to accommodate a new halogen bulb. We built a new lamp stand. The old lamp stand is up in a warehouse at Sonoma State Park, where the Sonoma Mission is, and it's adjustable. So we did a couple of things with this as we measured the brightness with the new bulb, and and the new bulb was going to be a little bit brighter than the old one. We didn't really want to make it brighter. We wanted to make it wider. So we did two things. We raised the filament by a fraction of an inch. So we lifted that little platform a fraction of an inch. Thus, the beam would face more downward towards central Contra Costa County rather than out toward the horizon, the Golden Gate Bridge and so on. And we moved it back toward the reflector a fraction of an inch so that the beam, in fact, would be just a little bit wider. That was one of the little things that happened as we were working. Paint was an interesting issue for us. This is one of the original photos that we had when the beacon was new. You can see the 1930s vehicles there, the military-looking truck. When the building was brand new, the beacon up there. But of course, being a black and white photo, we didn't know what color the beacon should be. We had the paint analyzed. There were some 9 layers of paint, but we still couldn't tell what color would be appropriate. There was even a code of international orange at one point, the same color as the Golden Gate Bridge, but there were others too, and we're just scratching our heads. Come on, we got to figure this out. And right then, one of the historians at the state, and here's how they were so helpful. One of the historians from the state called us and said, "You're not going to believe it. Go to your email. I just sent it to you." Look at that. Same vehicle, same vehicles, obviously the same time, but it was a color photo. The beacon was silver. So we painted it silver. And there it is, ready to go. The volunteer with the warehouse is this gentleman, Rex Bothell. He was just a terrific friend and helpful. His business was in this warehouse, but he had so we did not disclose the location because we didn't want people invading his business just to check on the progress of the beacon. So we kind of kept it quiet, but it was in North Concord, just north of Highway 4. So finally, in October, same year, 2013, at dawn, we started back up the hill and did the same reverse of taking it down. Maxim Crane showed up, the riggers from Shell showed up, and we set the beacon back where it belongs. This is what we call the bird cage. It's the ribs that support the red blinking aircraft light that is shining to this day. And then here's one of the riggers. Anybody want his job to stand up there on the railing to disconnect everything? Again, the media were there. The radio, television, newspaper, photographers. I did not take this picture, but it is not upside down. There's 3 of our Pearl Harbor survivors standing in the reflector. And yes, they are right side up, but the image is upside down. And finally, the beacon has been shining every December 7th since 2013. It's restored. The light is good. The paint is in good condition. There is a new bearing. The glass on the front has been replaced. And we did that every December 7th. And then in March of 2020, right, or April of 2020, right after the shutdown, the COVID shutdown, a couple of supporters of Save on Diablo contacted our new executive director, Ted Clement, suggesting that we turn on the beacon as a beacon of thanks or hope or inspiration to those who are still working during the shutdown. And Ted contacted the district superintendent, Eddie Guaracha, who was a really good guy. And he said, in classic state way, he said, "Gee, that's a great idea, but I have to check with Sacramento." but he did. And at 10 minutes to 5 on Friday before Easter Sunday, he called Ted and said, "It's a go, you're on." But Ted called me too. And I said, "Well, wait a minute, you got to talk to the Pearl Harbor people because this is their thing." But we talked with Chuck Kohler, and you can see um, it would seem selfish of us to not share, and especially it might help and comfort those who suffer during these difficult and trying times. So we lit the beacon every Sunday night at dusk. Dick and I took turns turning it on, and Ted every Monday morning got up and showed up at dawn to turn the beacon off. We did that for a year between April 2020 and April 2021. It was received with uh, great gratitude from the people. So many people have come to me and said, "Gee, every Sunday night it was really fun to sit out on my deck with a glass of wine and look at the beacon. Thank you." But workers said the same. So where are we now? Um, I was approached, I don't know, 3 years ago, I guess now, and said, um, why don't you guys light the beacon on Memorial Day and Veterans Day, as well as Pearl Harbor Day? And we did the same sort of thing, talked with the state and talked with Pearl Harbor survivors and others, and they all said, gee, that's a good idea. And so we are now lighting the beacon on those 3 dates, Memorial Day, Veterans Day. So we'll be on in November, and then Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th. Because of that, if you do a little bit of the math, from 1928 until 1941, the beacon was turned on and rotated every night. And then from 1964 until 2020, it was turned on but once a year. So maintenance issues are quite different. And now we're turning it on, for a year, we turned it on once a week. That's 52 years worth of what we were doing before. And now we're turning it on 3 times a year. We thought maybe we should take care of one issue that we knew was there. This was just this summer. This is looking up at the beacon from underneath. This is the gearbox that makes the thing rotate. So you can see the gear, to give you a feel, it's 13 or 14 inches in diameter. The copper rings there are slip rings to allow the light to shine. And over on the left is this little brass gear. And it was badly worn, and we knew it was badly worn. We knew it was worn in 2013 when we did the restoration, but it was also the original gear. And finally, we said, you know what, we need to deal with this. So this summer, we took the gearbox down, took it all apart, and this is in my garage. There is the old gear on the bottom, and we had a machinist in Stockton Gear Enterprises fabricate an entirely new gear. So we're going to be reinstalling that next month, the first part of next month. So we will be ready to turn the beacon on Veterans Day, and it will be ready to go. So here's a drone shot that Supervising Ranger Cameron Morrison made last year or the year before. I talked to him about it, and he just wanted to point out, by the way, it is not legal to use a drone in the state park. So don't get the idea you can go up there and do the same thing. He's a certified drone pilot and all that stuff. And they use the drone for, and you can imagine, for many other purposes than to just look at the beacon. But that's what it looks like, rotating about 10 times a minute, 6 times a minute, every 10 seconds. and it will be on dusk on Veterans Day. So a lot of people really helped with this uh, project and are maintaining the beacon today. Um, a lot of people contributed the photography. Lots of people were helpful with that, and so on. So Save Mount Diablo will continue to be doing this for the foreseeable future, no doubt about that. So Dan, I'm ready for questions.
Okay. Great program, John. Great slides. And I've got some questions, and we've had a couple that came in for us. Um, First of all, for mine, I know you had a close encounter with Admiral Nimitz himself. Would you us?
Well, that is correct. Um, I mentioned this to Dan the other day. Uh, Admiral Nimitz, we all learned in our history books, was the commander of the Pacific Fleet during World War II. And in his retirement, he had retired to Berkeley. And I grew up in Berkeley. And it turns out that his house was about 2 blocks from my house, and I delivered the Berkeley Gazette to him on my paper route. And paper boys back in the day had to be um, collecting. You had to knock on everybody's door to get their. I forget what the monthly fee was. $1 or $2 or something like that. And I knocked on this door, and I knew the address said Nimitz on it, but I didn't know anything except there is a freeway named the Nimitz Freeway, and this old man answered the door and said, "Come in, young man." And I went in, and the whole place was war memorabilia. Um, but I had seen so much of that from being dragged to Army Navy surplus stores when I was a younger lad, with my father, that I was totally unimpressed. And it wasn't until years later I realized, holy cow, that was Admiral Nimitz that I met. So, yes, I have a personal connection with the beacon as well. As long as I mentioned that, I neglected to mention um, it's something I try to remember to mention whenever I talk about the beacon. In 1964, when it was relit, um, we have, with the exception of the one article that I showed, no documentation, no photographs, above all, of anything that happened on December 7th, 1964. If I remember right, that was let's see now. I think it was a Saturday, and there was no Sunday paper in Contra Costa County, so they didn't cover it. The Monday paper, December 9th, had no article about it. I have not found any useful information about that date. If anybody's out there, let me know.
That is really curious. And maybe as a moral story to any young people out there, um, take note of who's on your paper route. I don't know if they
Yeah.
still. Yeah, that's a really good story. I'm from Lighthouse Country, and I
Sure.
have never heard of this lamp changer, the automatic lamp changer, let alone the automatic lamp changer slash phone call. Um, were all of the beacons equipped with such a thing?
Well, considering that there are hundreds of beacons, you can imagine there were hundreds of different styles and manufacturers and so forth. Uh, different sizes. Most of the beacons were 2 feet in diameter or even smaller. Um, Somewhere I read that in the earliest stages, some of the beacons were nothing more than an acetylene flame.
Wow.
Um, but but at that museum that I mentioned in New Mexico, my wife and I did visit that museum. Um, they have a couple of other beacons, the smaller 2 foot diameter ones there, and they do have a completely different design of lamp changer also. But you can imagine um, that since so many of these beacons had to be in very, very remote areas, uh, just to say, oh, the bulb went out. Well, I'll go get another one. That was no small trek to a lot of these places. So the lamp changer was, it would have been important back in the day.
Yeah, because you've got pilots with their lives on the line too.
You bet.
Yeah. Um, Question that came in from one of our energy efficient watchers. Uh, is there a move to replace the lamp with an LED?
Actually, uh, I wanted to do that 10 years ago, uh, be, because of the not just the energy use, but also the reliability of LEDs. And we met with some LED people, but the problem was that because of the nature of the reflector, we needed a real pinpoint source of light, and LEDs don't provide that. Uh, they showed up with an array of LEDs about the size of a soup can or so, um, but they would be totally ineffective when trying to appreciate or when trying to work with a reflector on the beacon. Um, Probably sometime in the future there will be the technology to do that. But for today, I don't want to say we're stuck with the halogen, but we'll be using we have a ready supply of halogen bulbs for many years to come.
Okay, that's good to know. This is maybe more of a comment, but I'm amazed at the fly by the seat of the pants operations with uh, pilots in open cockpits, beacons, arrows on the ground that would point you to the next beacon. I just think it's amazing. When you were doing your research, did that kind of click with you too?
Absolutely, the whole uh, it was a different time, of course. You know, you have to realize 1928 when this was originally erected. This is the time of Model T Fords.
Yeah.
We do have an article when the beacon, when the light itself was delivered to the summit of Monte Diablo. You talk open cockpit. It was an open cab, solid tire truck that delivered that delivered the light to the summit, and it was snowing. So imagine being that driver. Okay. Today we just turn on the heater in our car.
Yeah, and I got kind of chills when that guy was standing up on top of the walkway.
Oh
Just
yeah, I laughed about that with me, you know, because they're used to it. So that's like nothing to
yeah,
that guy.
couldn't talk me up there. Uh, can you talk a little bit about, and I don't know whether this was luck or maybe just the universe converging. You had uh, virtually or had found virtually every set of talent that you needed in order to pull this thing off.
Well, in conversation, Dan, I mentioned that without a doubt, the most rewarding part of doing this whole project was meeting the Pearl Harbor survivors. Uh, Dick and I are both in total agreement about that. The second most rewarding part of this was how the community came forward. I mentioned early on that the media were very supportive of this. We were on the front page of every newspaper, on television, and so forth, and loads and loads of talent contacted Save Mon Diablo saying, "Hey, I saw the article in the paper. That's a cool project. How can I help?" They just came out of the woodwork. It was really, it really was heartwarming. To give you just one example, um, at the time I was working at Las Positas College teaching there, and sure enough, there's the article in the Chronicle about this beacon restoration project, and the welding instructor contacted Save on Diablo and said, "Hey, um, I teach welding at Las Positas College. If you need any welding done, let me know." And and Dick knows how to weld. Whoops, I know how to weld, and so um, we thought, well, um, and at the time, we couldn't think of anything that would be useful for welding. But we said, "Thank you very much. That's really wonderful." And by the way, I kind of know you because my classroom was not 50 yards from yours. And anyway, he attended one of our meetings, and sure enough, we found all sorts of welding that needed to be done, and Scott Miner did all of it. And that's just one example. I mean, one other fellow called us up and said, I have a complete machine shop in San Leandro. If you need anything, let me know. That's that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's funny. We have the same experience at the museum that it seems as though as soon as we need somebody to show up that knows how to do something, they do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, um, John Stewart, the engineer, he was an engineer for PG&E. He was familiar with designing control systems, something that I know absolutely nothing about, and so on. It was really amazing.
Well, that's it for questions for us. But before I let you go, I want to concur with the last couple slides and the sentiments that the people had sent in regarding the presence of the beam. I've been to a number of the December 7th programs at Cal State East Bay, but the Sunday night during the pandemic, because I would do it every Sunday night. I would go out on my front porch and I would watch it. In fact, I had filmed it a couple of times and sent it to my friends around the country. And it was something comforting about that beam being there. So yeah, I can agree with a lot of what people were talking about with their relationship to the beam during that, really uncertain and difficult time.
Yeah, we had no idea across the board. We had no idea how this beacon would become so significant to so many people. Uh, the the way the community came forward with the restoration project, the way people support the whole Pearl Harbor idea, and now with Veterans Day and Memorial Day, the support again, the application for this beacon was not military at all; it was commerce. But today, it has this military significance instead. And then during the pandemic, yeah, lots of people have come to me and said, "Oh, you were turning it on? That is so cool that you guys did that."
It
Uh,
was, yeah.
yeah, and again, we just thought that would be kind of a nice thing to do, you know.
And it
Um,
was, I mean, as I said, it was comforting in a way, at least for me. We got one more emergency question that I want to get
an
to.
emergency
Uh,
question.
I don't want to shut her out. Stephanie had asked about, do we know how far the beam gets thrown? In other words, how far can you see it?
um, kind of. Um, First, it's the beacon, the beam is reputed to be, or the bulb is reputed to be 10 million candle power, so it's bright. You can warm your hands on the beam. I'm serious. This is no light bulb that you put in your kitchen. And so they say it can be seen for 25 miles. They say it can be seen for 100 miles. Um, we we did a study. We and after we after we reinstalled it, we did a study uh, where we test lit the beacon. This is probably November of 2013. We didn't tell anybody we were going to do this, except for those of us who were kind of in the know. And we stationed people all over the Bay Area. So to see if the main beam was shining there. So we put somebody in downtown in Danville. We put somebody in Walnut Creek. We had somebody in Livermore. We had somebody up on Grizzly Peak. Um, I mentioned our welding instructor. If I recall, he was in San Francisco at the time.
Wow.
My son lives in Redwood City, and he went over to the shore of the bay to see if he could see it, and everybody could see the beacon.
Wow.
So
That's
yeah, it's and imagine what it was like in 1928 when we
yeah,
didn't have all of the light pollution that we have today.
yeah, and that's a good chunk of geography too. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet it is.
Okay, John. Thank you. The slides were great. I particularly loved the drone shot, and not that I'm encouraging people to do that either, but
Nope, can't.
it is really cool. So that's it for questions. Thank you, John, and thank you all for viewing this morning. If you missed any of our earlier programs, you can find them by visiting the museum's website at museumsrv.org. John's program today will be available early next week. And join us again on October the 17th at 11:30. Our virtual program will be with Donna Kemp McMillian. She is a fourth generation Valley resident and will share stories from her top selling book about life in the Valley during the 1950s. If you like these programs and want them to continue, we ask that you make a donation by going to the museum's homepage, museumsrv.org, and clicking on the Donate Now button. The museum's also in need of volunteers. If you can give us some time, please contact us. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Stay safe, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.